Well, there seems to be some unsatisfied people with that conclusion of Season 6 of The Walking Dead. Hello, everyone, internet, interwebs, whatever you want to call yourselves. I have returned. As I promised on my earlier review, I will be doing more of these reviews, and I'm going to start branching into television. However, I'm not going to be doing any of those episode by episode stuff. For one, that becomes a real pain, and it's not worth it. And you can get too much into the minutia, and it's just not fun to do. So I'm not going to do that. Plus, it's a pain in the ass for time. But a season review, that's something more manageable. Something I think I want to do. So let's do The Walking Dead Season 6. Now, I'm a fan of The Walking Dead. I enjoy mostly the television series. I have read a couple of the comics, so I'm not a huge fan of the comics. Just mainly never just got into it, really. I tried a couple times, and this wasn't getting me. But I'll have to bring that around to a little bit when we're dealing with the fallout for this season. Now, before I get into what's going to dominate this video, no doubt, which is the final scene of this season, let me give my overall impression. This season, at least especially the first half, was really about the group and Alexandria merging into one, becoming one. You kind of had that at the very end of the last season. The group getting in contact with Alexandria, this community that has basically been able to isolate itself from the horrors of the zombie apocalypse, and even those that occasionally wander out for some supply runs are, really don't have to deal with too much. And then, of course, they bring in Rick, and then soon after they're attacked, unrelated to be the wolves, and then followed that, well, you have actually that scene at the very end where they kind of realize they are unprepared. They are, when Rick kills Porchstick, that's his name, let's face it. When Rick kills Porchstick, they kind of see how there's threats internally, both letting walkers get in and from kind of not tolerating that type of behavior within their walls. They had to reform. However, at the end of that, they still were not one. The first half of the season was all about, really it took place only over the course of a couple days, but was, in essence, all about the group and Alexandria becoming one and the same. One through kind of killing half of Alexandria, which is, you're kind of left wondering how many people were in that community, because they killed a ton. The wolves killed a ton. You lost a bunch of people when the walkers got in. You lost people, trying to, on the expedition out there. So Alexandria's kind of down in numbers, I gotta imagine. Now, of course, they had this whole thing with, is Glenn dead? Thing. People were upset, but some people were really. When you look at the scene, I kind of wrote Glenn off as dead. I just kind of went, well, he's gone. I mean, they showed his guts being ripped out. I was not buying into the Glenn's alive hype. So I did not get caught on that hype train. I really wrote him off as dead, and I figured people were just kind of like wishing for the best, unless he was. Well, no, it was too soon. No, well, I don't know. I could have I don't know. I'd have to see when they filmed stuff, but I suspect that was intentional. That they were going to make, and Glenn's alive. But that, I think, cliffhanger-y unevenness of the, ooh, is Glenn alive? Is he dead? I think that encouraged what had happened in the season finale. Now, before I get really into the season finale, a couple of other things. It's nice to see Morgan, who I don't think... I forget if Morgan's completely created for the show, or if his character is only in the early, couple issues of the comics, and he's kind of left to his own. But, it's nice to see that kind of Morgan coming back with his embrace of life, and Carol and her kind of maybe embracing the apocalypse a little too hard. How they come to a head, and yeah, it's a nice little progression with Carol. I mean, to some degree, I think her character perhaps degresses a little bit in relation to the audience, because the audience really likes badass Carol. However, I can see her characterization, coming to grips with she's murdered a lot of people. At night, that probably is something that does not set well with a lot of people. You even see that with surprisingly, despite what, if you just watch, procedural crime shows, a lot of people that commit murder confess to it rather readily, just because it weighs heavy on their conscience. So it's understandable why that character would come that way. Let's not beat around the bush. Now, of course, spoilers in effect. I mean, I'm assuming everyone listening has seen this season and seen this episode in particular. But this final episode, one, I've got to assume the Saviors have a lot of time on their hands, because they were planning these blockades. They could not have known, and they might have probably been out there, especially the one blockade that is just piles of dead trees. How many hours? What would have happened if Rick left earlier than they thought? Because that probably took a couple days to set up, even with tractors and stuff they implied. Came when it was half done, them still trying to get stuff up and positioned properly, and it just would have been oh, sorry, dude. And then to get the fire all set up with that, I mean, yeah, they're lucky Rick didn't have to leave a little earlier. And the other question is, how long were they gonna wait out there? Because they only were going to the hilltop because Maggie had that prenatal emergency. They might have been out there for a couple weeks. I don't think that was a regular run back and forth between the hilltop and Alexandria. So I guess they have a lot of free time. But they at least show the numbers that the Saviors are a very, very large group. Enough that you could see the people that they lost, while significant, it's still not even, how should I put this? Not even a quarter of the actual size of their group. It looks like the Saviors are quite large. Maybe they've killed maybe 10% of the Saviors. Not something you can laugh off. And though I'm kind of wondering, how does Negan recruit so many people? Because for the post-apocalypse, I mean, I think what people might point to, it's feudalism, but it's not, because feudalism would be that each community that falls under the Savior's protection then would send their own troop, soldiers to serve under Negan when he calls upon them. And it's implied that it's more of an outside, that they kind of enforce their own will. So I don't know how they recruit so many people. Unless, I don't know, maybe they came from further north, near Philadelphia, so there's just naturally more of them because there's more population out there versus people coming from the rural South. Maybe. Could possibly be that might be the case. Because like even the suburbias around the Northeast are more populated than the suburbias and the rural areas of the South, or at least Georgia, and certainly further west of that. But let's talk about that final scene. Jeffrey Dean Morgan did a fantastic job of being extremely charismatic as well as villainous, to the point where you're like, I was like, I like this character. Fuck the group. I want to join with this guy. You could see that charisma coming through on the screen, and it's really hard to do that. It's really hard. Like, you can have a character, you can see how they're charismatic and understand how people would follow them, but you normally yourself as a viewing audience are not going with them if they're the villain. Here's someone who we know is the villain, who most people have already heard he's going to kill one of the main characters. And yet you're kind of like, I like this guy. Like, not even the I like to hate type thing, like how they did with Joffrey in Game of Thrones, where you're kind of really like, ooh, I hate that little shit. I love to hate him, though. But that's like a love to hate. Here you're like, I like this character. I could get along with him. I could join him. Which, I mean, let's face it, compared to the group, the Saviors seem to be doing a lot better. If you're going to pick a group to be part of, thus far, we'll wait and see next season, because maybe we'll find some weirder shit going on. I don't know. But they seem to be like a pretty competent group. And I've noticed that with people who watch post-apocalypse movies, they will start siding with whichever seems the most practical, well-set-up group. Is, despite their brutality, people kind of go, it's the post-apocalypse. Brutality is kind of the way of life. If they seem to be progressing towards civilization and getting shit done, that's the group. Which is, I think, where some writers do not realize that, and they fuck themselves over, because the audience doesn't normally agree with them. A lot of zombie films are like that. Where, like, the military, oh, we're going to nuke this town to stop the zombie virus. And it's written so that the audience is like, oh no! When in reality, the audience is like, damn right, you fucking glassed that little town. Maze Runner, probably a better example, because technically I'm talking about them pre-apocalypse movies. But Maze Runner is a good example of that, where I know a lot of people from the Scorch Trials were like, you know what? The bad guys, they seem to have an idea. We have to sacrifice a few kids. We don't feel great about it, but we're going to cure this zombie virus with them. Okay, yeah, you can sacrifice. I mean, yeah, we're following the kids, which is why we sympathize with them, but a surprising number of people online were like, you know what? Fuck them. Survival of the human race, zombie plague, cure, harvest their brains. Okay. So I went off on a little tangent there. Sorry about that. But yeah, the Saviors seem really well put together. But in this case, I think you're kind of supposed to at least somewhat like view them as, I mean, we have, at least in this case, we have another competent group going up against this it's two competent groups, so you don't have to worry too much. And you really do get the sense of the Saviors as this big threat as a result. But the fact that they have this charismatic leader that even you can get behind, that tells me maybe we're going to see a little bit more of maybe they're going to gray the waters, that it's not just the evil Saviors and the goody two-shoes Rick in the group. Because, I mean, really, if you look at it, if you weren't following completely from Rick's and the group's perspective, they kind of mercenaried themselves out, and this became guns for hire. I mean, the Hilltop essentially hired them just to take out this other group. As afterwards they found out that Daryl in the fuel truck episode that they had threatened to kill him, but in this one, they really didn't know that those were saviors. So it's an interesting little turn. It's an interesting thing to look at is that maybe Rick's group's not the best either. Yeah, they're not goody two shoes. What else do I want? But yeah, so you had that fantastic scene. Now, of course, that ends with a cliffhanger, and the worst kind of cliffhanger. They show from some characters first. First, they do Negan. They're doing this great tension building throughout his speech, him doing the eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and then continuing on the poem, because then he goes, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And then he goes, catch a tiger by its toe. And normally those two verses right there is all people say. But then he continues on through the whole thing. And they keep on pausing after each verse because it is kind of weird. People, when they say that little rhyme, not everyone goes through the whole thing. So you're kind of like, oh, is he going to do it now? Is he going to do it now? And then they do that from one of the characters' perspectives. They show him, this smashing the character's skull in. You see that from their perspective. But it's such a cheap out way of doing things. And you immediately become aware of the writers are trying to impress me. You lose it. It's one of those, they were patting them, you could tell they were patting themselves on the back for how smart they wrote that. Perhaps not realizing that the audience is on to that. Now, that's not to say they had to do a complete resolved thing. You could have had it as so much of a cliffhanger, and with the fury that kind of broke out online as a result, and you could tell it must have been a lot, because you'll notice if you watch The Talking Dead afterwards, Chris Hardwick actually had to decided to bring that up, because apparently whoever's in his little ear, because let's face it, in reality there's these little earpieces that he wears so they get some feedback, that they had noticed that probably as soon as that happened it blew up, and they realized, oh, people are not happy with this ending at all. And so he asked the question to I believe that was the he's kind of like the showrunner, as well as Kirkman, about that. And you could see them kind of scrambling to go, it was so great. I don't think... Oh, crap. Who was that on the show? I'm trying to remember the guy's actual name, because he was like... I should know it, too, but... I'm going to have to look it up. Okay. Now, after 2 minutes of searching on Google, Scott Gimple, that was his name. He was the showrunner. He's like the third or fourth showrunner this show's had. But he tried defending it. I don't think he realized it was blowing up, though, the way it was when they were asking him that, because he was so self-congratulatory when he gave the response of, oh, it's so great because it's ending that story. And be honest, you thought you'd get everyone hooked and that people would love you for it. So I don't think he realized that the reason Hardwick asked that question was because the people in the studio, and I'm sure they had like a social media feed studio kind of command center somewhere, were realizing, oh shit, everyone's bitching about the ending. No one likes it. I think he probably would have came at a different approach. Apparently, looking at what I pulled up when I searched for his name is that apparently they've had like another press conference where they tried defending the episode. I haven't viewed any video from it, but it probably sounds like they probably realized it was way more people. People are like literally calling him on the bullshit. We know what you were doing. Which is the thing that they have the hardest time. A writer, a showrunner, they normally can justify stuff in Arco. We're doing this thing and that. But when you call him out for the commercial aspect of you're trying to learn viewers, you thought everyone would get hyped on this, it was... I lack the word at the moment for what you would call... I wanted to say meta, but it's not meta. where essentially people are going, we know the real reason, the kind of way you're trying to manipulate us, and we're calling you on it. In the same way, The Sopranos got called out for its ending. At the very least, though, at least this isn't a season finale like The Sopranos was, when they got that cut to black and they thought they were being way smarter than they actually were. To do the, oh, you figure it out. Audiences don't like that. Here's the thing: people I think people are, or at least studios are figuring out now, especially with series. Audiences prefer a definitive end, something that'll suffice as a finale. Audiences want a story to be told, and stories have endings. It's one of the reasons I think I like Defiance so much. For those of you who are not familiar with this, it was a series on the Sci-Fi Channel. It ran for 3 seasons. And they weren't certain. It was kind of interesting how it was cut. It was actually, during its run, it was the most popular show on Sci-Fi. However, it was also the most expensive, and Sci-Fi was doing new production, so they did a kind of a gamble, and they decided not to renew it, mostly due to its expense. It was also one of the more expensive shows. And so the producers were kind of aware of that could happen, and not knowing definitively if they were going to be canceled or not, wrote the season 3 finale like it was the series finale. As it turns out, it was, and it actually functions great. It functions perfectly. And this is kind of the example why, and people kind of loved that. Everyone was kind of happy with that. Versus, I think, some series that have faded over the years, despite their popularity at the time, because they don't end on a satisfying note. Sarah Connor Chronicles is a pretty good example, where it ended on a finale, on a cliffhanger, where young John Connor gets shot into the future, and he's in the future war with Kyle Reese. And sorry. And it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. You have a hard time even watching the rest of the series, knowing that it ends on that type of cliffhanger. And so studios that are smart are increasingly writing stuff with some sort of satisfying conclusion. Notice even in Gotham they did that now, where they at least wrote with season 1. Like, you could kind of see how it would end with, since like where these characters kind of go in Gotham, because they're all Batman villains. They were able to write that. So where even if it ended there, you cut, okay, well, everyone's set up for when Bruce Wayne then grows up a bit and becomes Batman. But I digress. With this, I mean, granted, it's coming back next season. It's the most popular show on television. I believe it was already renewed for season 7, but at the same time, you're like, really? Fuck you, writers. Especially when a lot of people were able to point to the way that this scene ended in the comics, and how it apparently ends in the comics is Negan smashes Glenn's skull in pretty much the same setup, and then kind of looks to the fourth wall, since there's no camera technically, and goes, ta-da! And with Jeffrey Dean Morgan's performance, I could have seen that working. And that could have been your cut. And you would have still had this scene of increased tension. And it would have been technically kind of a cliffhanger, because you're like, what the fuck? Like, how are the characters going to get out of that? To some degree, you can kind of like, well, he said he was going to, kind of just let him go and like take half their shit, as he puts it. But you got this tension, like, how is that going to fall out? Holy shit, that just happened. Same the way the Game of Thrones worked, where they had that scene where, with the Red Wedding. And in fact, that's what a lot of people are comparing this to. They are saying that The Walking Dead has missed its Red Wedding moment, where fans would have been shocked. It would have been a twist. It would have been a turn. You don't know where the hell the plot's going, but you're satisfied. And they really kind of miss it. It's amazing how that slight little change. Had they pick a character to die, killed him, ended on a little ta-da scene, I'm in agreement. It would have been better, especially knowing. Like, I know I just said about how I prefer seasons to end. I am of the type that I think each season should have its own arc, and the shit should be done by the end of the season. I don't like hanging threads at the end of seasons, and smart writers can come back and write. There should be threads that you can then branch off of if you need to. But I digress. But in this case, okay, we know it's coming back. It was confirmed. It was almost impossible for this show not to be renewed for season 7. But you can only do that so long. I would be nervous. If I was a writer on a show, I would, every season I would write as if it's going to be the last season. Ironically, that it doesn't mean you have to do yourself, which I think is the problem going on with this. But I digress. It's like the 7th time I said that. So yeah, that's my opinion, and that's why it leaves a stale taste in my mouth. At the same time, I also should point out that it feels very the series is feeling long in the tooth. I'm not sure if I said that at the beginning or not, but it definitely does feel like things are being stretched out. And from what I've also been told, that's kind of how things are starting to feel in the comics as well, where you're really feeling like things are that Kirkman, the writer of the comics, is now, just because they're popular, producing more. Probably that things should have been resolved probably with the Alexandria. Now much like kind of like Dragon Ball Z, actually, if I'm going to compare it to anything, where it really was written in that series. There was a villain called Frieza. Well, I probably should explain, just to compare that, is that Dragon Ball is kind of broken into 2 series. They're all also based on a Japanese comic. There was the Dragon Ball, which was a much more kiddie version. There was a bit of a tone shift at one point, and I think due to a couple different reasons, among also the tone shift that came about naturally in the story, they decided to rename it a Dragon Ball Z as technically a separate series. But there was this character, Frieza, who was quite clearly, everything how it was written wasn't very obviously written as the season finale. This is the end point. We've gotten to the ultimate villain. But it was an insanely popular series, so they kept on writing after that, and it kind of got a little wonky after that point, where they were going back and forth. Now they had some good arcs, they had the good stories told after that, but the series seemed to have lost its pacing a bit after that, and then of course eventually it did end, and people were not very satisfied with the ending. I'm kind of worried that maybe something the same will happen here. AMC is also apparently very notorious for being cheap. Despite how their shows look, they're not going to shell out the same type of money that HBO shells out for Game of Thrones. So we'll see how that all pans out. And so, it gives me some reason to be concerned, because I don't think the writer of the comics has a set endpoint, knows how he's going to end this series. He seems to just, let me throw more shit at the characters. Let me throw more shit at the characters. I have a feeling they're just going to get to the point where, this gravy train seems to be about ready to leave. I'm going to try to jump off here while the jumping off's good. So they write just kind of, we'll just end it here. I don't know, throw in a flash forward to the next generation where Carl's an old guy or something, which would probably be what they actually do. And I guarantee you they'll do that, and it'll be an unsatisfying ending. You're just like, kind of like Battlestar Galactica, a series that at least that was getting long in the tooth. Kind of clear they didn't really have a truly set end plan, despite the fact that the show starts with its actual end goal, set up, and then you get the bullshit that was that series finale, which was only in its like fourth season too, which was also a sci-fi show. Well, I'll give sci-fi credit. At least it gives some of its shows finales. You just have to be the number one rated show in the network, or else you end up like Dominion. Poor Dominion. That was one that was apparently they wrote the entire arc for that series, and apparently they only got through season 2, so it ends again on another unsatisfying ending because there was a planned series ending, but you needed 5 more seasons to get to it. Kind of the downside of writing that stuff out. But I digressed. I've gone on for now a half hour. I think you've gotten my impression on the series. I'm getting nervous about You Walking Dead. I would almost be happy if they like announce some sort of end date. Like they go, we're gonna do 2 more seasons. We're gonna do 2 more seasons and that's it. Unlike what they seem to be doing now, is that we're just gonna we're gonna shamble our way through this, and the series will become a zombie itself. At least that's kind of why I'm fine with the Game of Thrones. We know that in the series, the book series is based on, there's only 2 books left. One should be out relatively soon. But we know from like a television perspective that they're mostly saying it seems like we'll be getting 7 or 8 seasons total, and I wouldn't be surprised if the actual finale is done as a movie, which I'd be okay with that. I'm fine, especially if it's like a made-for-HBO movie, and they do a separate DVD release partially to help justify the costs. Which, I mean, let's face it, if they do it like as a 3-hour movie, then technically your final season, you can say it's like a 13-season final season if they do that. Or 13 episode. But, I'm getting nervous. This also could be good. I have a feeling that season 7 will be good, because I've read a few things about where it went in the comics, and that there's apparently, let's just say, conflict develops. But I kind of get the sense that perhaps if it goes on to season 8, I think they're going to build up some sort of war, basically, between that. And I have a feeling I know where it's going to end on season 8. And they're going to pretty much get caught up with the comic books really quickly. Because apparently this would be, there's like 150 issues in the comics. And this is like issue 100. Oops. But I think we're gonna get through like the next 30 issues or something like that in the next season. I think they're gonna really. That seems to be how it's set up. So we'll wait and see, I guess. Because if they try to drag that out to 2 seasons, I mean, there's a point. And I think it would be a good endpoint, but I think they're going to go beyond that. Again, I digress. I've said it enough times, and I'm going to end it here. That's my impression. Subscribe, all the other stuff. See you guys later. Have a good night.